Next story. What happened in Black Hollow Woods? Everyone who enters disappears. I've always been drawn to mysteries. Ever since I was a child, I've had this insatiable curiosity about things that couldn't be explained, things that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up and left me staring out windows late into the night. But nothing could have prepared me for what happened in Black Hollow Woods. It started with my sister, Clara. She wasn't just family, she was my best friend. We shared everything, the secrets we kept from our parents, the dreams we whispered under the covers when we thought no one else was listening. And then she vanished. Just like that. Clara disappeared 3 years ago. One day, she went hiking alone near the edge of Black Hollow Woods. She never came back. There were no signs of struggle, no evidence of foul play, and no body ever found. The authorities treated it as an isolated incident at first, but the more I dug, the more I realized hers wasn't the only disappearance tied to those woods. The locals call them Black Hollow Woods, though they rarely speak of them unless you press hard enough, and even then, their answers are vague, tinged with fear. They say it's cursed. Some claim it's haunted. Others believe it holds something ancient, something older than time itself. Whatever the truth is, one thing is certain. Anyone who enters doesn't come out again. Or if they do, they're never quite the same. At first, I tried to convince myself it was all superstition. After all, how could a foresta, place filled with trees and dirt and wildlife, be responsible for so many disappearances? But the more stories I uncovered, the harder it became to dismiss them as mere coincidence. People talked about hearing voices in the woods, seeing lights flicker through the trees at night, or feeling an overwhelming sense of dread that made them turn back before they ventured too far inside. One man told me he saw his missing brother standing among the trees, calling his name. Another woman swore she heard children laughing, not the happy kind, but something twisted, almost malicious. When I asked where these sightings took place, every single person pointed toward the same spot, the heart of Black Hollow Woods. And yet, despite all the warnings, I knew I had to go there. Not because I wanted to solve some grand mystery or become famous for uncovering the truth. No, I needed answers for myself, for Clara, for everyone whose lives had been torn apart by those woods. If it meant risking my own life, so be it. But little did I know, stepping into Black Hollow Woods would change everything. Preparation became my obsession. For months, I studied maps, read accounts online, and scoured forums dedicated to unsolved mysteries. I stocked up on supplies, a flashlight, extra batteries, matches, water purification tablets, and a portable GPS device. My phone wouldn't work once I entered the woods. I'd already learned that much, but I figured the GPS might help keep me oriented. Still, deep down, I felt uneasy. It wasn't just the stories anymore. It was the way people reacted when I mentioned the woods. Their faces would pale, their voices drop to barely audible whispers. "You shouldn't go there," they'd say. "Something's wrong with those woods." On the morning I set out, the air was heavy with anticipation or maybe dread. I parked my car at the edge of the forest, where the asphalt road abruptly ended and the dirt trail began. A rusted sign stood crookedly beside the path, its paint chipped and faded. In bold letters, it read, "Warning, Black Hollow Woods unsafe for travel." Below that, someone had spray painted a single word in red: "Turn back." I hesitated for a moment, staring at the sign. Was this really such a good idea? Could I trust myself to make it out alive? Then I remembered Clara's face, her smile, the last time I saw her. That memory steeled my resolve. Taking a deep breath, I stepped onto the trail. At first, everything seemed normal. The sun filtered weakly through the canopy above, casting dappled shadows across the ground. Birds chirped in the distance, and the occasional breeze stirred the leaves. But as I pressed deeper into the woods, the atmosphere began to shift. The sounds of nature grew quieter until they stopped altogether. No birdsong, no rustling leaves, not even the faintest whisper of wind. Just silence. A strange sensation crept over mean itch between my shoulder blades, like someone was watching me. I spun around, scanning the trees behind me, but there was nothing. Nothing except the endless rows of trunks stretching endlessly into the distance. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. My GPS started acting up next. At first, it simply lost signal, which I expected. But then the screen glitched, displaying random coordinates that didn't match any known location. Lines appeared where they shouldn't, forming patterns that looked almost deliberate, like symbols or sigils. Frustrated, I turned it off and shoved it into my bag. Time began to warp. I couldn't tell whether hours or minutes had passed. The sun seemed stuck in the sky, refusing to move. Shadows lengthened and shortened unpredictably, casting shapes that didn't belong. Once, I thought I caught sight of Movementa figure darting between the trees, but whenever I approached, it vanished without a trace. Then came the whispers. They started softly, almost imperceptibly, carried on a non-existent breeze. At first, I thought it was my imagination playing tricks on me. But as I listened closer, I realized the voices weren't random, they were speaking names. Familiar names. Names of people who had gone missing in Black Hollow Woods. Clara, one voice murmured, low and mournful. My heart froze. I spun around, searching for the source, but there was no one there, just the trees, standing silent and unyielding. The further I went, the stranger the forest became. Trees bent at impossible angles, their branches twisting into grotesque shapes. Vines snaked across the ground, writhing like living creatures. Even the air felt different, thicker, heavier, pressing against my chest with each breath. And still, the whispers followed me, growing louder, more insistent. You shouldn't be here. Turn back while you can. They're waiting. For a brief moment, I considered doing exactly that, but something drove me forward, a compulsion I couldn't explain. Maybe it was guilt, maybe it was hope, or maybe it was something darker, a pull exerted by the woods themselves. Eventually, I reached what I believed to be the center of Black Hollow Woods. The trees thinned slightly here, revealing a clearing bathed in an unnatural light. It wasn't sunlight, it was colder, paler, casting long, distorted shadows that danced erratically across the ground. In the middle of the clearing stood a massive tree, its trunk blackened and cracked, its roots spreading outward like clawed fingers. Carved into its bark were symbols I didn't recognize, glowing faintly with a sickly green hue. As I approached, the whispers grew deafening. Now, they weren't just names, they were memories, fragments of conversations, moments stolen from my mind. I heard Clara's laugh, her voice teasing me about something trivial. I heard my mother crying after learning of Clara's disappearance. I heard myself screaming in terror as the realization hit me. The forest was feeding off my memories. Panic surged within me, but I forced myself to focus. What was this place? Why did it exist? And why did it seem so intent on consuming those who entered? That's when I noticed the figures gathered at the edge of the clearing. At first, I thought they were statues, lifeless, unmoving shapes carved from stone. But as I watched, they shifted, turning their heads ever so slightly to regard me. Faces emerged from the darkness, pale and gaunt, their eyes hollow pits of emptiness. "Welcome home," one of them rasped. Home? What did they mean by that? Before I could ask, the ground beneath me trembled violently. Roots burst forth from the earth, wrapping around my legs, pulling me toward the massive tree. I struggled, kicking and clawing at the soil, but the roots held fast. Panic gave way to desperation as the whispers turned into screams, echoing in my ears until I thought I'd go mad. And then, just as suddenly as it began, it stopped. The roots released me, retreating back into the ground. The figures in the clearing dissolved into mist, leaving me alone once more. The tree loomed above me, its glowing symbols dimming until they vanished entirely. For a moment, I sat there, trembling, trying to process what had just happened. It was then that I noticed the notebook. Propped against the base of the tree was a small, leather-bound journal. Its pages were yellowed with age, the ink faded but still legible. Curiosity got the better of me, and I picked it up, flipping through the entries. Each one belonged to someone who had entered Black Hollow Woods before me, people who had written down their experiences, their fears, their final thoughts before disappearing forever. The last entry was unfinished. "I don't know what this place is, but it knows me. It knows everything about me. It shows me things I wish I could forget, makes me relive moments I'd rather bury." Is this what happens to everyone who comes here? Do we all end up trapped in our own minds? Beneath the words was a single sentence scrawled in frantic handwriting. "If you're reading this, run. Get out while you still can." I dropped the notebook and stumbled backward, my pulse racing. Run? How could I run when I didn't even know where I was anymore? The paths had twisted and turned, leading me in circles until I lost all sense of direction. And now, standing in this eerie clearing, I wondered if escape was even possible. As the days, perhaps hours dragged on, I began to piece together the truth about Black Hollow Woods. It wasn't a physical place, not entirely. Yes, the trees and the ground existed, but the forest itself was something else, a gateway, a prison, a manifestation of whatever dwelled beyond the veil of reality. The whispers, the memories, the figures in the clearing, all of it was part of the forest's design. It fed on emotions, on fears and regrets, using them to ensnare its victims. Those who entered rarely left, not because they were killed, but because they became part of the woods themselves. Trapped in an endless loop of torment, reliving their worst moments over and over again. But there was more, much more. In the quiet moments, when the whispers subsided and the forest seemed almost peaceful, I began to hear another sound of voice, distinct and clear, speaking directly to me. It wasn't human, not exactly, but it understood my language well enough. It called me by name, promised me answers if I stayed, if I surrendered. "What do you want?" I demanded, though I wasn't sure if it could hear me. "To show you the truth," it replied, its voice resonating in my mind. "To let you see what lies beyond." Beyond what? Beyond the woods? Beyond life itself? The voice didn't answer. Instead, it showed me images, flashes of light and shadow, glimpses of places I couldn't begin to comprehend. Worlds unlike anything I'd ever imagined, populated by beings both beautiful and horrifying. And in the center of it all, a figure watching me, smiling faintly as though it knew something I didn't. Was this real? Or was it merely a trick, a ploy to keep me trapped? I couldn't tell. All I knew was that I had to get out. Somehow. Days later, maybe minutes, I emerged from the woods, gasping for air as sunlight blinded me. My clothes were torn, my skin scratched and bruised, but I was alive. More importantly, I was free. Or so I thought. Back in my car, I checked my phone for the first time since entering the woods. To my relief, it worked again, showing full bars and a strong signal. I opened the map app, expecting to see the location of the nearest town. Instead, the screen displayed a message. "You're still here." My blood ran cold. I stared at the phone, then glanced around me. The forest loomed in the rearview mirror, its edges blurring and shifting as though mocking me. Had I truly escaped? Or had the woods followed me out? I haven't slept since. Every night I hear the whispers again, softer now, but persistent. Sometimes I think I see faces in the shadows outside my window, watching me, waiting. And sometimes when I close my eyes, I swear I feel roots curling around my ankles, pulling me back into the darkness. Maybe I'll never leave Black Hollow Woods after all. Mothman warned us before disaster. It was a crisp autumn evening in Point Pleasant, West Virginia, where the air carried a chill that hinted at the approaching winter. The clock read 7:45 p.m., and the sky above was painted with hues of orange and purple as the sun dipped below the horizon. In the small town nestled along the Ohio River, life moved at a leisurely pace, but tonight would be different for the Carter family, Michael, his wife Emily, and their teenage son Jake. Little did they know, an encounter with something extraordinary was about to change their lives forever. The Carter family had gathered in their living room after dinner, settling in for a quiet evening together. Michael sat on the couch reading a newspaper while Emily worked on a knitting project nearby. Jake, engrossed in a video game, occasionally paused to comment on the news stories his father shared aloud. The atmosphere was calm, almost serene, until a sudden gust of wind rattled the windows, startling them all. "What was that?" Emily asked, glancing toward the window. She rose from her seat and approached it cautiously, peering outside into the gathering darkness. Beyond the yard stretched a dense forest, its towering trees swaying gently in the breeze. At first glance, nothing seemed amiss. But then, out of the corner of her eye, she caught movementa flash of something large and winged soaring silently through the trees. Her breath hitched and she turned back to her family, her voice trembling slightly. "Did you see that?" Michael set down his newspaper, curiosity piqued. He joined Emily at the window, squinting into the distance. For a moment, there was nothing but the rustling leaves and chirping crickets. Then, without warning, the creature reappeared, a massive figure with wings spanning at least 10 feet, its glowing red eyes piercing through the shadows like twin beacons. It hovered briefly before disappearing into the depths of the forest, leaving behind an unsettling silence. Jake dropped his controller, rushing over to join his parents at the window. "What was that thing?" he whispered, his voice filled with awe and fear. Michael shook his head, unable to offer an explanation. None of them had ever seen anything like it before. As they stood there, trying to process what they'd witnessed, a strange sensation settled over Thema, feeling of being watched, as though unseen eyes lingered just beyond the tree line. Later that night, as the family prepared for bed, the memory of the winged creature continued to haunt them. Unable to shake the unease, Michael decided to do some research. He retrieved an old encyclopedia from the bookshelf and flipped through the pages, searching for any mention of similar sightings. To his surprise, he discovered references to a legendary entity known as the Mothmanna mysterious creature said to have appeared in Point Pleasant during the late 1960s, coinciding with a series of bizarre events culminating in a tragic disaster. The parallels between those accounts and their own experience were uncanny. The next morning, the Carters discussed their findings over breakfast. They agreed that the Mothman's reappearance couldn't be ignored. It felt like a warning, a sign of impending danger. Determined to uncover more information, they visited the local library where they met Mr. Jenkins, an elderly librarian who had lived in Point Pleasant for decades. His eyes widened when they mentioned the Mothman, and he nodded knowingly. "Ah, yes," he said solemnly. "Many people dismissed it as mere folklore back then, but those who paid attention knew better. The Mothman always appears before tragedy strikes." His words sent shivers down their spines, but they pressed him for details. Mr. Jenkins recounted stories of other sightings of people describing the same glowing red eyes, the same silent flight, and the same ominous presence. He also spoke of the Silver Bridge collapse in 1967, which claimed the lives of 46 people, occurring shortly after the last reported sighting of the Mothman. The connection was undeniable, and the Carters left the library with a heavy sense of foreboding. Over the following days, strange occurrences began to unfold around Point Pleasant. Power outages plagued the town, leaving entire neighborhoods plunged into darkness. Strange noises echoed through the woods at night, low growls and haunting whispers that sent chills down the spines of anyone who heard them. Farmers reported livestock behaving erratically, refusing to enter certain areas near the riverbank. And then came the dreams, vivid nightmares plaguing each member of the Carter family, filled with images of collapsing structures and desperate screams. One evening, as the family sat together in the dim glow of candlelight due to another power outage, they heard a deafening screech that reverberated through the air, followed by the sound of flapping wings overhead. They rushed to the window, hearts pounding wildly, and saw the Mothman once again, this time perched atop a nearby telephone pole. Its red eyes locked onto theirs, staring intently as if delivering a final message. Without speaking, they understood the gravity of the situation. That night, the Carters made a decision. Packing only essentials, they left Point Pleasant, seeking refuge in a neighboring town. Days later, news broke of a catastrophic event. A major bridge connecting Point Pleasant to Ohio had collapsed under mysterious circumstances, mirroring the tragedy of decades past. Scores of people lost their lives, and the town was left reeling in shock and grief. Though grateful for their escape, the Carters couldn't help but wonder about the Mothman's true nature. Was it a harbinger of doom, or a guardian trying to warn humanity of dangers yet unseen? Whatever the case, one thing was certain: their lives had been forever altered by the encounter. Even now, years later, whenever they hear the distant cry of birds or catch glimpses of shadows moving in the twilight, they pause and remember the glowing red eyes that saved them from disaster. In the end, the Carters learned to live with the knowledge that some mysteries are best left unanswered. Yet, deep down, they remain convinced that the Mothman is still out there watching, waiting, ready to deliver its warnings to those willing to listen. Bigfoot whispered my name at night. It was a quiet evening in the small town of Pine Hollow, where the air carried the scent of pine needles and damp earth. The clock struck 10:30 p.m. as the Carter family, Michael, his wife Emily, and their two children, Jake aged 12 and Lily, who was 8, settled into their modest cabin on the edge of a dense forest. The cabin itself was nestled deep within the towering trees, its wooden walls creaking softly with every gust of wind that swept through the valley. For years, the Carters had enjoyed peaceful nights here, lulled to sleep by the rustling leaves and distant calls of nocturnal creatures. But this night would be different. The family gathered around the fireplace, its warmth casting flickering shadows across the room. Michael read aloud from an old book about local legends, pausing occasionally to explain the tales to his curious children. Among the stories were whispers of Bigfoot, a mysterious creature said to roam these very woods, watching silently from the shadows. While Jake listened intently, his imagination sparked by the vivid descriptions, Lily curled up beside her mother, her eyes wide with a mix of fascination and fear. As the fire dwindled and embers glowed faintly, the family retired to bed, each retreating to their respective rooms. Outside, the forest grew eerily still, the usual sounds of wildlife replaced by an unsettling silence. It wasn't long before Lily woke with a start, her heart pounding wildly in her chest. She lay perfectly still, straining her ears to listen. At first, she thought it might have been a dream faint rustling outside her window, the soft tapping against the glass, but then came the voice. "Lily," it whispered, low and gravelly, yet unmistakably clear. Her breath caught in her throat as sheer terror gripped her body. The voice wasn't human. It carried an otherworldly quality, reverberating through the room as if spoken directly into her mind. Clutching her blanket tightly, she squeezed her eyes shut, willing the sound to stop, but it didn't. Instead, the whispers grew louder, more insistent, calling her name over and over again until it filled every corner of the room. Outside, the moon peeked through the clouds, casting silvery light across the forest floor. Shadows danced eerily among the trees, their movements unnatural and deliberate. Lily dared not cry out for fear of drawing whatever presence lingered closer. Her hands trembled as she reached for her flashlight, switching it on cautiously. The beam of light illuminated nothing but empty space near her window, though she could feel its gaze boring into her from somewhere beyond. Unable to bear the suspense any longer, Lily slipped quietly out of bed, padding softly toward the door. She hesitated briefly before opening it, just enough to peek into the hallway. To her relief, the rest of the house appeared calm, the rhythmic breathing of her family members audible through the thin walls. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone was watching her every move. Back in her room, the whispers resumed, growing bolder now. They weren't merely calling her name anymore, they were speaking directly to her, urging her to come outside. "You won't be afraid," the voice promised, its tone soothing yet undeniably menacing. "Come see me, I've waited so long." Each word sent shivers down Lily's spine, yet part of her felt inexplicably drawn to obey. Summoning whatever courage she possessed, Lily tiptoed to the front door, her fingers trembling as she turned the handle. The cool night air greeted her as she stepped onto the porch, her bare feet brushing against the wooden planks. The forest loomed ahead, its darkness impenetrable even under the pale glow of the moon. Yet, amidst the shadows, she spotted Movemanta's massive figure standing motionless at the edge of the tree line. Its form was hulking, its shoulders broad and covered in thick fur that shimmered faintly in the moonlight. Its head tilted slightly, studying her with eyes that glowed like embers in the dark. For a moment, neither moved, locked in a silent exchange that seemed to stretch on forever. Then, without warning, the creature took a step forward, its massive feet crunching against the fallen leaves. Lily gasped, stepping back instinctively. "Stay away," she shouted, her voice cracking slightly. The creature paused, tilting its head once more as if considering her words. Then, slowly, it raised one hand, pointing toward the forest. "Follow me," it whispered, its voice resonating through the night air. Paralyzed with fear but unable to look away, Lily stood frozen as the creature turned and disappeared into the depths of the woods. Behind her, the door creaked open as Michael emerged, alerted by her cries. "Lily, what's wrong?" he asked, his voice laced with concern. But when he looked where she pointed, there was nothing, only the endless expanse of trees swaying gently in the breeze. Inside, the family huddled together, trying to make sense of what had happened. Emily held Lily tightly, her own fear masked by maternal instinct. Michael grabbed a flashlight and ventured cautiously into the woods, searching for any sign of the mysterious figure. But the forest remained silent, its secrets hidden beneath layers of shadow and mist. In the days that followed, strange occurrences plagued the cabin. Objects moved on their own accord, doors creaked open and shut without explanation, and whispers echoed through the halls late at night. Lily claimed to hear her name called repeatedly, though no one else could confirm the sounds. Despite their skepticism, the family began to believe they were being watch-stalked even by something far greater than themselves. Desperate for answers, they consulted local historians and Native American elders, learning about the legend of Bigfoot and its connection to the land. Some believed the creature acted as a guardian of the forest, protecting it from those who sought to harm it. Others spoke of encounters with beings who communicated telepathically, offering guidance or warnings depending on intent. Regardless, the parallels between these accounts and their own experiences were undeniable. Weeks turned into months, and the haunting continued. Sleep eluded the Carters as they listened helplessly to the whispers that filled their home. Eventually, they made the difficult decision to leave Pine Hollow behind, relocating to a city far removed from the forest and its mysteries. For a time, peace returned to their lives. They rebuilt routines, finding comfort in the familiarity of urban surroundings. Yet every now and then, during quiet nights when the world seemed most still, Lily swore she heard it again, that same gravelly voice whispering her name softly in the dark. Years later, the Carters rarely spoke of their ordeal. Though grateful for their escape, they couldn't shake the feeling that the forest and its enigmatic inhabitant hadn't truly let go. Somewhere, deep within the woods surrounding Pine Hollow, Bigfoot still waited, watching, listening, ready to call another name into the night. Slender Man took my best friend. It was a crisp autumn evening in the small town of Briarwood, where the air carried a chill that hinted at the approaching winter. The clock read 7:45 p.m. as Megan Carter sat alone in her dimly lit bedroom, scrolling through social media on her phone. Outside, the wind rustled through the towering oak trees, their golden leaves scattering across the yard like confetti. Inside, Megan's house was quiet, save for the occasional creak of the wooden floors and the soft hum of crickets chirping outside. Her best friend, Clara, had promised to visit earlier that day, but she hadn't shown up yet. Megan wasn't worried. Clara was always running late, but something about the evening felt off. Megan decided to call Clara just to check in. The phone rang twice before being answered, but instead of hearing her friend's familiar voice, there was only silence. "Clara, are you there?" Megan asked, her voice tinged with concern. Still no response, just the faint sound of breathing on the other end. A shiver ran down Megan's spine. "Hello? Is someone there?" She tried again, her heart beginning to race. Suddenly, the line went dead, leaving Megan staring at her phone in confusion. She shook it off, telling herself it was probably just a bad connection. But as the hours passed and Clara still didn't show up, Megan's unease grew. By 10:00 p.m., she couldn't take it anymore. Grabbing her coat and flashlight, she headed out into the night to look for her friend. The streets were eerily quiet, the only sounds being the rustling leaves and the distant hoot of an owl. Megan checked all the usual spots, their favorite coffee shop, the park where they used to play as kids, even Clara's house, but there was no sign of her. As Megan walked back toward her own home, she noticed something strange, a figure standing at the edge of the forest near the old abandoned factory. It was tall, unnaturally so, with limbs that stretched impossibly long and thin. Its face was obscured by darkness, but its presence radiated an undeniable menace. Megan froze, her breath catching in her throat. She wanted to run, but her legs felt rooted to the spot. For what felt like an eternity, the figure simply stood there, watching her with glowing red eyes that burned like embers in the night. Finally, Megan forced herself to move. She turned and sprinted back to her house, slamming the door shut behind her and locking it tightly. Her hands trembled as she dialed Clara's number again, hoping against hope that this time she would answer. But the call went straight to voicemail. Panicked, Megan called Clara's parents next. They sounded just as confused and worried when she told them about the missed meeting and the mysterious figure in the woods. The next morning, Megan and Clara's parents reported her disappearance to the police. Officers arrived at the scene, searching the area thoroughly but finding nothing unusual. No footprints, no signs of struggle, nothing to indicate anyone had been there recently. As the days turned into weeks, the investigation yielded no results. Clara was gone, vanished without a trace, leaving behind only unanswered questions and lingering fears. Megan struggled to cope with the loss of her best friend. Every night she dreamed of the figure in the woods, its glowing red eyes staring into hers as if trying to communicate something important. Sometimes, in those dreams, she saw Clara standing beside the figure, her face pale and hollow, her eyes devoid of life. When Megan woke up, drenched in sweat and gasping for air, she couldn't shake the feeling that whatever had taken Clara was still out there, watching and waiting. Desperate for answers, Megan began researching online, digging deeper into local legends and urban myths. That's how she first learned about the Slender Man, a mysterious entity said to haunt forests and deserted areas, preying on unsuspecting victims. Some claimed he acted out of malice, while others believed he was a guardian of sorts, protecting the woods from intruders. Regardless of his motives, the stories shared one common thread: those who encountered him rarely returned. Megan became obsessed with uncovering the truth. She visited libraries, spoke with locals who had heard similar tales, and even ventured back into the forest where she had seen the figure that night. Each trip left her more convinced that the Slender Man was real and that he had taken Clara. Strange things began happening around her house's shadows, moving unnaturally in the corners of her vision, whispers echoing through the halls late at night, and occasionally, faint giggles that sounded both childlike and menacing at the same time. One evening, as twilight painted the sky in hues of orange and purple, Megan decided to try one last thing: a seance. Gathering candles, a Ouija board, and every protective charm she could find, she set up in her basement, hoping to make contact with Clara or whoever else might be listening. At first, nothing happened. The room remained silent, the only sounds being the flickering flames and Megan's rapid breathing. Then, without warning, the planchette on the Ouija board moved, spelling out words in jagged, uneven letters. "Help me," it read. Megan's heart pounded wildly in her chest. Was it really Clara, or was it something else entirely? Before she could ask another question, the lights in the basement flickered violently, plunging the room into near darkness before snapping back on again. Megan screamed, covering her ears as a deafening screech filled the air, echoing off the walls and reverberating through her skull. When she opened her eyes, the room was empty. The candles had been extinguished, the Ouija board lay scattered across the floor, and the protective charms hung broken and useless. But in the corner of the room, written in what looked like charcoal, were 3 chilling words. "She's with me now." From that moment on, Megan's life changed forever. Sleep eluded her as she listened helplessly to the whispers that filled her home. Shadows moved unnaturally in the corners of her vision, and sometimes, during quiet nights when the world seemed most still, she swore she heard Clara's voice calling her name softly in the dark. Though she tried to convince herself it was all in her head, deep down, Megan knew better. Years later, Megan rarely speaks of her ordeal. Though grateful to still be alive, she can't shake the feeling that the forest and its enigmatic inhabitant hasn't truly let go. Somewhere, deep within the woods surrounding Briarwood, the Slender Man still waits, watching, listening, ready to claim his next victim. La Llorona drowned my sister. It was a humid summer evening in the small town of Rio Vista, where the air hung heavy with the scent of rain-soaked earth and blooming jasmine. The clock read 9:30 p.m. as Emily Carter sat on her porch, fanning herself against the sticky warmth that refused to dissipate even after sunset. Her younger sister, Lily, played nearby with a group of neighborhood children, their laughter echoing through the quiet streets lined with towering oak trees. Unbeknownst to them, the tranquility of this moment would soon shatter into chaos. The Carters lived in a modest house near the banks of the Rio Vista River, a winding waterway that had been both a source of life and legend for generations. Tales of La Llorona, the weeping woman said to haunt riversides searching for her lost children, were whispered among locals, though most dismissed them as mere folklore. Emily, however, had always felt an inexplicable unease whenever she heard those stories. That night, her instincts screamed louder than ever before. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the yard, Emily noticed something odd about the river. Its usually calm surface rippled unnaturally, as if stirred by an invisible hand. A faint mist began to rise, curling lazily toward the shore like tendrils of smoke. She dismissed it at first, chalking it up to the humidity, but then came the sound of a low, mournful wail carried on the breeze, haunting and otherworldly. It sent shivers down her spine, and she instinctively called out to Lily, urging her to come inside. "Lily, time to head home," Emily shouted, her voice cutting through the twilight. The children paused their game momentarily, glancing toward the house. But instead of obeying, Lily hesitated, drawn to the edge of the riverbank by some unseen force. "Just one more minute," she pleaded, her eyes wide with curiosity. Emily frowned, sensing the growing tension in the air, but reluctantly agreed, promising to keep a close eye on her. Minutes later, the atmosphere shifted dramatically. The sky darkened prematurely, clouds rolling in with unnatural speed, blotting out the stars and moon. A cold wind swept through the area, carrying with it the scent of salt and decay, unlike anything Emily had ever smelled before. The laughter of the children faded into silence, replaced by an oppressive stillness that pressed down on everything around them. And then, from somewhere beyond the tree line, came the sound again, this time clearer, closer, and unmistakably human. "Miss Hijos! Miss Hijos!" cried a voice, high-pitched and filled with anguish, reverberating through the night. The words echoed in Spanish, translating to my children, each syllable dripped with sorrow, yet beneath it lay a menace that made Emily's blood run cold. She turned sharply toward the river, her heart pounding wildly in her chest. There, standing knee-deep in the water, was a figure cloaked in white, a woman with long, tangled hair that obscured her face, her arms outstretched as if beckoning someone forward. "Lily!" Emily screamed, lunging toward her sister just as the child took another step closer to the edge. But it was too late. Before anyone could react, Lily slipped into the murky depths of the river, vanishing beneath the surface without so much as a splash. Panic surged through Emily as she dove in after her, fighting against the current that seemed stronger than any natural force. Beneath the water, she saw shapes moving, sinister figures with hollow eyes and skeletal hands reaching out to drag her deeper. Somehow, Emily managed to claw her way back to the surface, gasping for air as tears streamed down her face. She searched frantically for any sign of Lily, calling her name over and over until her voice cracked from exhaustion. But there was nothing, no movement, no response, only the eerie silence broken occasionally by the distant echo of La Llorona's cries. Hours passed as searchlights scanned the riverbanks and divers combed the waters, hoping against hope to find Lily alive. Days turned into weeks, and still, no trace of the little girl emerged. The community mourned alongside the Carter family, offering condolences and sharing their own tales of encounters with La Llorona. Some claimed to have seen her wandering the riverbanks at night, her ghostly form illuminated by the pale light of the moon. Others spoke of hearing her cries during storms, warning people to stay away from the water. For Emily, the guilt became unbearable. Every night, she dreamed of that moment, the icy grip of the river pulling her under, the skeletal hands grabbing at her ankles, and the hollow eyes staring back at her from the darkness. She began hearing things, too soft whispers in the dead of night, footsteps outside her bedroom window, and sometimes faint giggles coming from the direction of the river. Each sound drove her further into despair, convincing her that La Llorona wasn't done tormenting her family. Months later, when winter settled over Rio Vista, bringing with it biting winds and frost-covered branches, Emily decided she couldn't live with the uncertainty anymore. Armed with a flashlight and a determination born of desperation, she ventured to the riverbank late one night, determined to confront whatever entity had taken her sister. As she stood there, trembling in the cold, she finally saw her, clearly the woman in white, her hair flowing like ink across her shoulders, her face twisted into a grotesque mask of grief and rage. "Why did you take her?" Emily demanded, her voice shaking but resolute. The figure tilted its head slightly, studying her with eyes that burned like embers. Then, without warning, it lunged forward, its translucent fingers brushing against Emily's cheek before retreating into the mist. In that instant, Emily understood the spirit hadn't acted out of malice. It had mistaken Lily for one of its own lost children, drawn by the innocence and vulnerability all children share. Though the revelation brought some measure of closure, it did little to ease the pain of losing her sister. Emily continued to visit the riverbank, leaving offerings of flowers and candles in hopes of appeasing the restless soul that haunted its waters. Over time, the sightings of La Llorona diminished, as if the spirit had found peace or perhaps simply moved on to another place where unsuspecting victims wandered too close to the edge. Even now, years later, Emily carries the memory of that night with her wherever she goes. Every now and then, during quiet nights when the world seems most still, she hears the faintest whisper of a child's laugh or feels the chill of unseen breath against her neck. And though she tells herself repeatedly that it's over, deep down, she can't help but wonder if La Llorona is still out there watching, waiting, searching for her next child to claim. Bloody Mary answered in my mirror. It was a humid summer night in the small town of Briarwood, where the air felt thick and heavy, pressing down on everything like an invisible weight. The clock struck midnight, and the house on Elm Street stood silent, except for the faint hum of crickets chirping outside. Inside, Megan Carter, a curious 17-year-old with an insatiable appetite for urban legends, sat alone in her dimly lit bathroom. Her friends had dared her earlier that evening to summon Bloody Maria, ghostly figure said to appear in mirrors when called upon under specific conditions. Though skeptical, Megan's curiosity got the better of her, leading her to attempt the ritual herself. The bathroom was small but functional, its walls painted a pale blue that now seemed almost gray in the low light. A single bulb flickered above the sink, casting eerie shadows across the room. Megan stood before the mirror, her reflection staring back at her with wide eyes full of both excitement and apprehension. She took a deep breath, trying to calm her racing heart. "Okay," she whispered to herself, her voice barely audible over the sound of her own pulse pounding in her ears. "Here goes nothing." She closed her eyes tightly and began the chant, her voice steady at first, but growing shakier with each repetition. Bloody Mary, Bloody Mary, Bloody Mary. With every word, the temperature in the room seemed to drop noticeably. By the time she reached the third repetition, goosebumps erupted along her arms, and the hairs on the back of her neck stood on end. Still, she pressed on, determined to see this through. Bloody Mary, Bloody Mary, Bloody Mary. On the final repetition, Megan hesitated, her courage wavering. But then, as if responding directly to her call, something strange happened. The light above the sink flickered violently, plunging the room into near darkness before snapping back on again. Megan gasped, her eyes flying open. What she saw in the mirror made her blood run cold. Instead of her own reflection staring back at her, there was another figure, a woman with long, tangled hair that hung loosely around her face, her skin deathly pale and streaked with what looked unmistakably like blood. Her eyes burned with a malevolent intensity, boring straight into Megan's soul. Megan stumbled backward, nearly tripping over her feet as sheer terror gripped her body. "What? Who are you?" she stammered, her voice trembling uncontrollably. The figure in the mirror didn't respond immediately. Instead, it tilted its head slightly, mimicking Megan's movements as if mocking her fear. Then, without warning, the mirror cracked a jagged line spreading outward from the center, splitting the image into fractured pieces. Megan screamed, covering her ears as a deafening screech filled the air, echoing off the walls and reverberating through her skull. Outside, the storm that had been brewing all evening finally broke loose. Thunder roared in the distance, lightning illuminating the sky with brilliant flashes of white-hot energy. Rain began pelting against the windows, adding to the cacophony of sounds that now surrounded Megan. Trapped in the bathroom, she could feel the atmosphere shifting, becoming heavier, more oppressive. It was as though the very fabric of reality was bending to accommodate some otherworldly presence. Desperate to escape, Megan turned and bolted toward the door, wrenching it open and fleeing down the hallway. Her bare feet slapped against the cool wooden floor as she ran, her breathing ragged and uneven. Behind her, she swore she heard footsteps soft but deliberate, following her every move. Each step echoed eerily through the otherwise silent house, sending chills down her spine. When she reached her bedroom, she slammed the door shut and locked it, leaning heavily against it as relief washed over her momentarily. But the reprieve was short-lived. As Megan caught her breath, she noticed something odd about her room. Shadows danced across the walls, moving independently of any light source. The curtains billowed despite no wind entering through the closed windows. And then came the whispers, faint at first, but gradually growing louder until they filled the entire space. They were unintelligible, yet undeniably sinister, wrapping themselves around Megan's mind like tendrils of smoke. Unable to bear it any longer, Megan grabbed her phone and dialed her best friend, Clara. "Clara, you won't believe what just happened," she cried out, her voice cracking with emotion. She recounted the events in hurried bursts, pausing only to take shallow breaths between sentences. On the other end of the line, Clara listened intently, her usual skepticism replaced by genuine concern. "Megan, you need to get out of there," she urged urgently. "Go somewhere safe now." But leaving wasn't so simple. As Megan tried to compose herself enough to leave the house, strange occurrences continued to plague her. Objects moved on their own accord, drawers opening and slamming shut seemingly without cause. The lights flickered erratically, plunging parts of the house into darkness while others remained inexplicably illuminated. Most disturbing of all was the feeling of being watched not just by the entity in the mirror, but by something else entirely. Something older, darker, more primal. By dawn, Megan realized she couldn't stay in the house another minute. Summoning whatever courage she had left, she gathered her things and slipped outside, the fresh morning air providing a stark contrast to the suffocating atmosphere inside. She drove to Clara's house, where she collapsed onto the couch, sobbing uncontrollably as she recounted every detail of the horrifying ordeal. Together, they researched Bloody Mary legends, piecing together fragments of information that hinted at the origins of the vengeful spirit said to haunt countless mirrors across the country. Over the following weeks, Megan noticed subtle changes in her life. Strange reflections appeared in mirrors even when she knew no one else was present. Whispers followed her wherever she went, haunting her dreams and seeping into her waking moments. No matter how hard she tried to convince herself it was all in her head, deep down she knew the truth. Bloody Mary had answered her call, and now she wouldn't let go easily. Months later, Megan still carries the scars of that fateful night. Though she has since moved away from Briarwood, seeking solace in unfamiliar surroundings, the memories linger like ghosts refusing to be exorcised. Every now and then, late at night when the world seems most still, she glances nervously into the mirror, half expecting to see those same hollow eyes staring back at her once more. Next story. The small town that forgot it existed. I never thought I'd stumble into something so unnatural. It started with a whisper, really a story passed down through hushed conversations and forgotten diaries. A town erased from existence. Not just physically, but mentally, as if it had never been there at all. The kind of tale you dismiss as folklore until you find yourself standing on its threshold. My name is irrelevant now. I've tried to hold on to it, but the harder I grasp, the more it slips away like sand through my fingers. All I know is that I was drawn here by curiosity, or perhaps something darker, an urge to uncover what should remain buried. This place, this small town that forgot it existed, it calls to those who dare look too closely. Let me take you back to where it all began. It was late autumn when I first heard about it. I was in a bar, one of those dingy little holes in the wall where the patrons seem older than the building itself. The bartender mentioned it almost offhandedly while wiping down a glass already clean enough for surgery. "Ever hear of Eldon Hollow?" he asked, his voice low, conspiratorial. Eldon Hollow. The name rang hollow in my ears as though it carried some weight I couldn't yet understand. I shook my head, prompting him to lean closer, his breath warm against my ear. "They say it's a ghost town," he whispered, "but not the kind with tumbleweeds and skeletons. No, this place, it's alive. People still live there. They just don't remember anything." He stopped then, letting the words sink in. My pulse quickened, not out of fear, but fascination. What kind of town could exist like that? How could people forget everything, their names, their families, even the concept of time? "Where is it?" I pressed, unable to mask the eagerness in my tone. The bartender smirked, leaning back as though satisfied with my reaction. "That's the thing," he said. "You can't find it unless it wants you to." And yet, somehow, I did. The drive to Eldon Hollow felt endless. My GPS flickered and died halfway there, replaced by static-filled silence. Maps showed nothing but wilderness where the town supposedly lay. But I kept driving, guided by instinctor, maybe something else entirely. When I finally arrived, it was dusk, and the air smelled faintly of earth and decay. At first glance, Eldon Hollow seemed ordinary. Rows of quaint cottages lined narrow streets, their windows glowing softly with lamplight. Smoke curled lazily from chimneys, carrying the scent of wood smoke. Children played in the street, laughing without abandon. Couples strolled arm in arm, their faces serene. Yet beneath the surface, something wasn't right. I parked near the edge of town and stepped out, my boots crunching on gravel. Immediately, I noticed them, the townsfolk. They moved like automatons, performing mundane tasks with mechanical precision. A woman swept her porch despite the absence of dirt. A man watered plants that didn't need watering. Their movements were precise, deliberate, but devoid of purpose. And their eyes held no spark, no recognition. No one acknowledged me as I walked past. Not a glance, not a word. It was as though I didn't exist. Curiosity overrode unease, and I pushed deeper into the heart of Eldon Hollow. The main square was eerily quiet, save for the ticking of a massive clock tower looming above. Its hands spun wildly, defying logic. One moment it read 3:17 p.m., the next midnight, then noon again. Time meant nothing here. A shopkeeper stood behind his counter, arranging jars of preserves. He looked up as I entered, his expression blank. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice monotone. "I'm looking for information," I replied cautiously. "About the town, about why it feels so strange." The shopkeeper tilted his head, confusion flickering across his face before smoothing over. "Strange?" he echoed. "This is Eldon Hollow. There's nothing strange about it." "But," I hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. "Don't you notice? The clocks? The way people act?" His brow furrowed slightly as though struggling to comprehend my meaning.
Then he smiled a brittle, forced smile and said, "Maybe you're tired. Traveling can do that to a person. Why don't you stay the night? Rest your mind." Before I could respond, he turned away, resuming his task with robotic efficiency. I lingered for a moment longer, unsettled, before stepping back outside. As the hours passed, the oddities multiplied. At the bakery, I watched a young girl repeatedly stack and unstack loaves of bread, her actions mechanical and repetitive. Across the street, a barber shaved the same customer over and over, each stroke identical to the last. Conversations faltered mid-sentence, speakers staring blankly ahead as though searching for words that refused to come. Time stretched thin here, warping and twisting like taffy pulled too far. Minutes dragged into hours, days blurred into weeks, yet no one seemed to notice or care. Life in Eldon Hollow was a loop, a perpetual cycle of meaningless motion. By evening, I sought refuge in the local inn, hoping to piece together what I'd witnessed. The innkeeper greeted me warmly, though her smile lacked warmth. She introduced herself simply as Mrs. Harper, offering little else. Her memory, like everyone else's, appeared fragmented. She couldn't recall how long she'd lived in Eldon Hollow or even where she'd come from. "You must be new," she observed, setting a tray of tea on the table. "Most visitors don't stay long." "Why's that?" I asked, sipping the bitter liquid. She paused, considering. "Because they realize they don't belong here," she said finally. "This place, it changes you, makes you forget." Forget. The word hung heavy in the air, resonating with ominous implications. Forget what? Who? Why? That night, sleep eluded me. Shadows danced along the walls, cast by unseen lights. Outside, the wind howled, mournful and insistent. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked incessantly, its cries echoing through the empty streets. I sat up, clutching the blanket tightly, and stared out the window. The moon hung low in the sky, blood-red and distorted. Beneath it, figures moved faceless silhouettes drifting aimlessly through the darkness. They weren't human, not anymore. Whatever remained of their identities had been stripped away, leaving behind shells of flesh and bone. What force drove this madness? Was it natural or supernatural, or worse, man-made? Answers came slowly, pieced together from fragments of conversation and discarded objects. An old journal found tucked beneath a loose floorboard spoke of experiments government-funded studies conducted decades ago. The entries grew increasingly erratic, filled with warnings of loss and void. One passage stood out. They promised progress. Instead, they took everything: memories, identities, souls. Progress, void. The words echoed in my mind, intertwining with visions of shadowy figures cloaked in lab coats, injecting syringes into unwitting subjects. Had Eldon Hollow been a test site? A laboratory disguised as a community? Or was something older, darker at play? Some cosmic entity feeding on identity, consuming the essence of humanity like prey? The latter explanation sent chills down my spine, yet it fit the surreal atmosphere better than any scientific rationale. Evidence mounted as I explored further. In the church basement, I discovered photographs yellowed snapshots of smiling families, children playing, couples embracing. None of the current residents recognized themselves in these images. To them, the past was a void, a black hole devouring all traces of who they once were. In the schoolhouse, dusty yearbooks sat abandoned on shelves, pages flipped open to reveal portraits of students whose names were scribbled out, replaced by question marks. Teachers gazed stoically into the camera, their expressions vacant, even the dates were smudged, unreadable. Somewhere deep within the labyrinth of memories and mysteries, I began to suspect the truth. Eldon Hollow hadn't always been this way. Once, it had Three-Veda bustling hub of life and culture. Then, something happened. Something catastrophic. Days or perhaps weeks passed in a haze. My own grip on reality weakened as I delved deeper into the town's secrets. Faces became familiar, yet unfamiliar. Voices whispered in my ear, urging me to join them, to let go of my burdens. One morning, I woke to find myself standing in front of a mirror. My reflection stared back, distorted and wrong. My hair had grown longer, my skin paler. Lines creased my forehead, etched deep by stress and uncertainty. Most disturbing of all, my eyes, they mirrored the emptiness I'd seen in the townsfolk. Had I started forgetting too? Panic set in as I realized the truth. Eldon Hollow wasn't just affecting its inhabitants, it consumed outsiders as well. The longer I stayed, the more pieces of my identity slipped away. Names, dates, place us all reduced to ash in the furnace of oblivion. Desperate, I attempted to leave. But the roads twisted and turned, leading me back to the center of town. The clock tower loomed ever present, its hands spinning faster, louder, drowning out rational thought. Buildings shifted positions overnight, creating mazes of alleyways and dead ends. Escape proved impossible. And then, the twist. While rummaging through an abandoned house, I uncovered a photograph tucked inside a drawer. The image showed a younger version of myself, arms wrapped around a group of friends. Behind us stood the unmistakable silhouette of the clock tower. I froze, staring at the photo in disbelief. How could this be? If I'd been here before, if I'd been part of Eldon Hollow? The realization hit like a freight train. I wasn't just a visitor, I was one of them. Time collapsed in on itself after that. Days blended into nights, minutes stretched into eternity. The townsfolk welcomed me back not with joy, but with indifference. Another soul reclaimed by the void. Another fragment added to the collective amnesia. Now, as I sit alone in the inn, penning these final words, I feel the pull of forgetfulness tugging at my mind. Names slip from memory, faces blur, emotions fade. Soon, I won't remember who I am or that I ever was. Will you find this journal? Will anyone believe the tale of Eldon Hollow, the town that forgot it existed? Or will it vanish again, swallowed whole by the abyss? All I know is that the clock keeps ticking, faster, louder, closer. And soon, it will claim me too.
Don't just watch in the dark. Click subscribe, like, and join now. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from and what time is it there? The Book That Called Me. The streets of Chicago were slick with rain, reflecting the dim orange glow of streetlights like shattered mirrors. It was 5 in the morning, and the city seemed to hold its breath under a heavy sky streaked with gray clouds. The storm had rolled in from Lake Michigan without warning, drenching everything in sight. Victoria Evans stood on the corner of Wabash Avenue, clutching her coat tighter around herself as she waited for the traffic light to change. She hated mornings like this, cold, wet, and eerily quiet, but her job at the library demanded punctuality. Victoria worked at Harold Washington Library Center, a towering structure that loomed over South State Street like some ancient sentinel. The building's glass facade shimmered faintly in the pre-dawn gloom, catching the occasional flash of lightning that lit up the horizon. As she approached the entrance, her shoes squelching against the wet pavement, she noticed something odd, a single book lying face down on the steps leading up to the main doors. Its cover was dark, almost black, and water pooled around it in tiny rivulets. No one else was around. The security guard, who usually manned the early shift, hadn't arrived yet. She hesitated for a moment before picking it up. The book felt heavier than it should have been, its pages damp but not entirely soaked through. There was no title on the spine or cover, just an embossed pattern of swirling lines that seemed to shift slightly when viewed from different angles. A shiver ran down her spine, though she couldn't say why. Maybe it was the way the book felt. Alive somehow, pulsing faintly in her hands. Still, curiosity got the better of her. She tucked it under her arm and pushed open the heavy glass door. Inside, the library was silent except for the faint hum of fluorescent lights overhead. Rows upon rows of shelves stretched out into shadowy corners, their contents neatly organized, yet somehow foreboding in the dim light. Victoria made her way to the circulation desk near the center of the atrium, setting the book down carefully, as if afraid it might bite. Her fingers lingered on the cover for a second longer than necessary before she pulled them away abruptly. Something about it unsettled her deeply, though she couldn't put her finger on what exactly it was. Her coworker, Daniel Harris, arrived shortly after, yawning loudly as he shuffled toward the desk. He was tall and lanky, with messy brown hair that stuck out in all directions despite his best efforts to tame it. "Morning, Vic," he muttered, glancing briefly at the book before shrugging. "What's this?" "I found it outside," Victoria replied, keeping her voice low so as not to disturb the stillness. "It doesn't have a title or anything." Daniel raised an eyebrow but didn't comment further. Instead, he reached out to touch the book, his hand hovering above it for a moment before making contact. His expression changed instantly from mild curiosity to outright alarm. "Whoa, this thing is freezing." Victoria nodded, though she hadn't thought much of the temperature earlier. Now that Daniel mentioned it, the air around the book did seem colder, almost unnaturally so. She watched as he flipped it open cautiously, revealing blank pages that looked yellowed with age despite being completely dry, or at least they appeared blank at first glance. When Daniel tilted the book slightly toward the light, faint words began to emerge, written in ink that shimmered like oil slicks. They weren't English or any language Victoria recognized, but the shapes twisted and writhed across the page as if trying to escape the confines of the paper. "This is messed up," Daniel whispered, snapping the book shut quickly. He glanced around nervously, as if expecting someone or something to appear from the shadows. "We should probably report this to management." But Victoria shook her head firmly. "Not yet. Let me look at it again." She wasn't sure why, but the book called to her in a way she couldn't explain. It wasn't just curiosity anymore, it was compulsion, a gnawing need to understand what lay within those shifting symbols. Reluctantly, Daniel handed it back to her, muttering something about coffee before disappearing into the staff lounge. Alone now, Victoria opened the book once more. This time, the sensation was stronger, the weight of unseen eyes watching her every move. The text seemed clearer too, forming jagged patterns that pulsed rhythmically, almost like a heartbeat. Without realizing it, she leaned closer, her nose nearly brushing the surface of the page. And then she heard it a whisper, soft and insidious, threading itself into her thoughts. It wasn't audible in the traditional sense, more like a memory surfacing unbidden. The voice spoke in fragments, disjointed phrases that coalesced into meaning only when she focused hard enough. "Find me," it said. "Free me." Startled, Victoria slammed the book shut, her heart pounding wildly in her chest. Had Daniel heard it? Was she imagining things? She glanced toward the staff lounge, half expecting him to come running out, but there was no sign of him, just silence and the oppressive weight of the library closing in around her. For the rest of the day, Victoria tried to focus on her duties, shelving returned books and assisting patrons with research queries. But the presence of the mysterious volume weighed heavily on her mind. It sat on the edge of her desk, seemingly innocuous, yet impossible to ignore. Every time she passed by, she swore she could feel it humming softly, vibrating with suppressed energy. By late afternoon, the temptation became unbearable. She locked herself in the staff break room, determined to decipher even a fraction of what the book contained. The whispers returned almost immediately, louder this time, overlapping each other until they formed a cacophony of voices. Some pleaded for help, others screamed in agony, while a few laughed maniacally. Victoria pressed her palms against her ears, shaking her head violently to block them out. But the sound wasn't external, it came from inside her own skull, burrowing deeper with each passing second. Tears streamed down her face as she forced herself to concentrate, tracing the intricate patterns on the page with trembling fingers. Slowly, painstakingly, the symbols began to rearrange themselves, forming words she could finally understand. "They seek you," the text read. "They hunger." Before she could process what it meant, the lights flickered violently, plunging the room into darkness. A low rumble echoed through the building, like distant thunder, but somehow wrong, unnatural. Victoria scrambled to her feet, clutching the book tightly as she fumbled for the doorknob. When she stepped back into the main hall, the atmosphere had shifted dramatically. Shadows danced along the walls where none should exist, twisting and contorting into grotesque shapes. The air smelled metallic, tinged with decay. And worst of all, The silence was gone, replaced by faint scratching sounds, like claws dragging across wood. "Daniel?" she called out, her voice cracking with fear. No response. Panic rising, she moved toward the circulation desk, hoping to find some semblance of safety there. But as she rounded the corner, she froze. The shelves lining the aisles were no longer filled with books, they were empty, hollow husks stretching endlessly into the gloom. Where had everything gone? What was happening? A sudden movement caught her eye, a figure darting between the rows ahead. It was small, hunched over, moving with jerky, unnatural motions. Victoria backed away instinctively, clutching the book to her chest like a shield. The figure stopped abruptly, turning to face her. Its head tilted sideways, impossibly far, joints cracking audibly. Then it lunged. She screamed, stumbling backward as the creature skittered forward on all fours, its limbs elongated and spider-like. Its face, if it could be called that, was featureless save for a gaping maw lined with needle-sharp teeth. The thing moved faster than she thought possible, closing the distance between them in seconds. Just as it leapt toward her, Victoria threw the book at it in desperation. The impact sent it sprawling, screeching in pain as smoke rose from where the tome had struck its body. Seizing the opportunity, she bolted toward the exit. Outside, the rain had intensified, soaking her instantly as she sprinted down the steps. Thunder boomed overhead, drowning out the sound of her frantic footsteps. She didn't stop running until she reached her car, slamming the door shut behind her and locking it with shaking hands. Breathing heavily, she glanced at the passenger seat and froze. The book sat there, dripping wet, its cover cracked open slightly to reveal glowing symbols etched onto the inner pages. "No," she whispered, reaching out tentatively. "How did you?" The car rocked violently as something slammed into the roof, denting the metal inward. Another crash followed, then another, accompanied by guttural growls that reverberated through the vehicle. Victoria ducked low, covering her head as shards of glass rained down from the shattered windshield. Through the chaos, she saw the library in the distance, its windows pulsing with sickly green light. The book vibrated fiercely in her lap, urging her to return. Against her better judgment, she obeyed. Back inside, the scene had changed again. The aisles were intact now, stocked with books as if nothing had happened, yet the oppressive feeling lingered, thicker than ever. The whispers grew louder, converging into a single voice that spoke directly to her. "You cannot run," it hissed. "You are mine now." Victoria spun around, searching for the source, but found only emptiness. Until she saw him, the man standing at the end of the aisle, partially obscured by shadows. He wore a tattered suit, his skin pale and translucent, eyes sunken and hollow. In his skeletal hands, he held a copy of the same book she carried. "Michael Parker," he rasped, taking a step closer. "I've been waiting." And then the world dissolved into darkness. When Victoria awoke, hours later, she was seated at the circulation desk. The library was empty, bathed in the golden light of dawn filtering through the windows. For a moment, she thought it had all been a nightmare. But when she looked down, the book lay open before her, its pages filled with fresh writing. "They will come for you next." Next story. Alone in office, rainy night shift horror, lonely office in the rain. The rain drummed against the glass windows like 1,000 tiny fingers, tapping an unrelenting rhythm. Outside, the night was pitch black, save for the faint glow of distant streetlights reflecting off puddles. Inside the old office building, fluorescent lights buzzed and flickered intermittently, casting eerie shadows that danced across empty cubicles. Ethan sat at his desk, hunched over a computer screen displaying rows upon rows of data entries. It was his third week working as a night shift data processor, and he already hated every second of it. The isolation gnawed at him, but the paycheck kept him coming back. Or maybe it was just the hope that things would get better with time. But tonight felt different. He couldn't quite put his finger on why. At exactly midnight, the power surged briefly, causing the monitors to blink out before sputtering back to life. Ethan sighed, muttering under his breath about outdated wiring. He glanced up at the clock 12. 3A-man tried to focus on the task ahead, but something about the silence pressed down on him, heavier than usual. He reached for his thermos of coffee, only to find it empty. Cursing softly, he stood up from his chair and stretched his sore muscles. As he walked toward the break room, the sound of his footsteps echoed through the cavernous space, each step reverberating like a heartbeat in the darkness. The break room was located near the far end of the floor, past several rows of abandoned cubicles. Most of them were relics from when the company had been thriving years ago, their contents long since cleared out except for a few stray papers and broken staplers. Ethan passed by one such cubicle and paused. There, on the edge of a dusty desk, lay a single piece of paper printout with no apparent source. Curiosity piqued, he picked it up. The page contained a cryptic message typed in bold letters. "Don't stay after midnight." Ethan frowned. Was this some kind of prank? He turned the paper over, searching for any clues or signatures, but there was nothing else written on it. Shrugging it off as someone's idea of humor, he crumpled the note and tossed it into the trash can beside the printer. Returning to the break room, he refilled his thermos with what little coffee remained in the pot. As he stirred in sugar, he noticed another sound of faint creaking noise coming from somewhere deeper inside the building. At first, he dismissed it as the building settling, but then it happened again, louder this time. It sounded deliberate. Shaking off the unease, Ethan decided to ignore it. After all, it was probably just the wind or pipes expanding due to the cold. Still, the hairs on the back of his neck stood on end as he made his way back to his station. When he returned, however, something was wrong. His computer screen displayed a new window he hadn't opened an email draft addressed to all staff. The subject line read, "Reunion Reminder." Beneath it, the body of the email consisted of 3 simple words. "We miss you." Ethan froze. This wasn't normal. Who could have sent this? More importantly, why did those words send chills down his spine? Before he could investigate further, the intercom crackled to life. A low, distorted voice whispered through the speakers, "You shouldn't be here." Ethan's heart pounded against his ribcage as the intercom fell silent. The voice, low, guttural, and unmistakably menacing, had sent a wave of dread coursing through him. He stared at the speaker above his head, half expecting it to speak again, but the room remained eerily quiet, save for the relentless patter of rain outside. He tried to rationalize what had just happened. Maybe it was a malfunction. Perhaps leftover recordings from some corporate event were accidentally triggered. Yet deep down, he knew that explanation felt hollow. There was something off about this place tonight, something unnatural. Deciding not to take any chances, Ethan grabbed his phone and dialed security. It rang once, twice, then went straight to voicemail. Panic bubbled in his chest. Of course. They wouldn't be back until morning. He was utterly alone. His gaze shifted back to the computer screen. The email draft still lingered, its words mocking him. Slowly, hesitantly, he clicked "Reply All," hoping to send a message to whoever or whatever was behind this. As soon as he hit send, the screen flickered violently, plunging the office into darkness for a split second. When the lights returned, the email window was gone. In its place was a live video feed from one of the building's surveillance cameras. The footage showed an empty hallway leading to the stairwell. At first glance, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Then, almost imperceptibly, a shadow moved along the wall shape too distorted to belong to anyone human. Ethan swallowed hard, his throat dry. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, unsure whether to close the window or keep watching. Before he could decide, the shadow detached itself from the wall and stepped into view. It wasn't a person, not exactly. Whatever it was, it walked hunched over, dragging its feet across the floor. Its form was indistinct, cloaked in blackness, but Ethan could swear he saw two glowing red eyes staring directly into the camera and, by extension, at him. The feed cut off abruptly, leaving Ethan paralyzed with fear. His breath came in shallow gasps as he scrambled to make sense of what he'd seen. Was this real, or was exhaustion playing tricks on him? Suddenly, the sound of footsteps echoed through the office. Heavy, deliberate steps that reverberated through the empty space. They weren't coming from the hallway or the stairs. They were right outside his door. Ethan froze, clutching the edge of his desk. The doorknob began to rattle, slowly turning clockwise. A cold breeze swept into the room, though there were no windows open. The air grew thick, oppressive, making it harder to breathe. And then the door creaked open. Standing in the doorway was a figure cloaked in shadows, its face obscured by darkness. For a moment, Ethan thought it might be someone else working late, but as the figure stepped closer, he realized it couldn't possibly be alive. Its movements were jerky, unnatural, and its presence radiated pure malice. Who are you?" Ethan stammered, his voice trembling. The figure didn't respond. Instead, it raised a hand, pointing directly at him. From its fingertips, tendrils of smoke-like mist unfurled, curling toward Ethan like serpents. He recoiled, knocking over his chair in an attempt to escape, but the mist followed, wrapping around his ankles and pulling him backward. "No, get off me!" he screamed, thrashing wildly. But the more he struggled, the tighter the grip became. The figure loomed closer, its glowing red eyes locking onto his own. Ethan could feel its gaze piercing through him, stealing away fragments of his sanity. Just before everything went dark, he heard a whisper so faint it barely registered. "You shouldn't have stayed after midnight." Ethan woke up with a start, his body drenched in cold sweat. He was lying on the floor, his chair overturned beside him. The office lights flickered above, casting an unsettling glow over the room. For a moment, he wondered if it had all been a nightmare, cruel trick of his exhausted mind. But then he noticed something that made his blood run cold. The cryptic note he'd crumpled and thrown away earlier was now pinned to his computer monitor, unfolded, pristine, as though untouched by time. And beneath the original message, "Don't stay after midnight," was a new line scribbled in red ink. "It's too late for you." Ethan's heart raced. This wasn't a dream. Whatever had happened last night or perhaps this morning was very real. His hands shook as he reached for the note, but before he could touch it, the sound of laughter echoed through the office. It wasn't joyful laughter. It was hollow, mocking, and filled with malice. The noise seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at the same time, bouncing off walls and twisting into shapes Ethan couldn't comprehend. He pressed himself against the corner of his desk, trying to shrink away from the unseen source. "Who's there?" he called out, his voice barely above a whisper. "Show yourself." The laughter stopped abruptly, replaced by an oppressive silence so heavy it felt like breathing underwater. Then, Faintly, he heard footsteps again, this time closer, more deliberate. They weren't coming from outside the door, they were moving inside the office. Ethan turned slowly, his eyes scanning the rows of cubicles behind him. Most of them were empty, their contents long since removed. But one stood out a cubicle near the window where papers were scattered across the desk, as though someone had left in a hurry. A framed photo sat upright among the chaos, showing a group of people smiling brightly. Curiosity and perhaps a desperate need for answers drew Ethan toward the cubicle. As he approached, the photo caught his eye. The faces in the picture looked familiar, though he couldn't place why. Each person wore a badge labeled with their name: Sarah, Mike, Lisa, Jake, names etched into Ethan's memory without explanation. And then he saw the date printed at the bottom of the photo: 1987. A shiver ran down his spine. Something about that year sent warning bells ringing in his mind. Before he could process it further, the intercom crackled to life once more. This time, instead of whispers or distorted voices, Ethan heard distinct words spoken clearly. "They're waiting for you." "Who? Who's waiting?" Ethan demanded, his voice cracking. There was no answer, only static, followed by a deep, guttural growl that seemed to emanate from every corner of the room. The air grew colder, frost forming on the edges of the windows despite the lack of ventilation. Then, one by one, the lights went out. Total darkness enveloped the office, broken only by the faint glow of the emergency exit sign. Ethan fumbled for his phone, using its flashlight to guide his steps. He needed to get out now. But as he backed toward the door, he realized it wouldn't budge. Someone or something had locked him in. Panic surged through him, but he forced himself to stay calm. If there was a way out, he had to find it. That's when he noticed movement in the shadows. Shapes emerged from the darkness, humanoid yet warped, their forms shifting and contorting unnaturally. Their glowing red eyes locked onto his, unblinking and merciless. "You shouldn't have stayed," one of them whispered, its voice layered with echoes. Ethan stumbled backward, tripping over debris until he found himself back at his desk. Desperation clawed at him as he searched for anything that might help him fight or survive. His fingers brushed against something metallic, a letter opener left behind by a previous occupant. Armed with the makeshift weapon, Ethan faced the advancing figures. They moved slowly, deliberately, as though savoring his terror. One of them stepped forward, its form solidifying into the shape of a woman. Her face was pale, her hair matted with blood, and her mouth stretched impossibly wide in a grotesque grin. "Join us," she hissed, extending a hand. "No!" Ethan shouted, lunging forward with the letter opener. The blade struck true, embedding itself in her shoulder. She screamed a high-pitched, ear-splitting sound that reverberated through the office, but instead of retreating, she dissolved into smoke, leaving behind nothing but ash. Encouraged by his success, Ethan attacked the others, swinging wildly with the letter opener. Each strike sent them scattering into mist, but more kept appearing, their numbers growing with each passing second. It was like fighting ghosts, because that's exactly what they were. As dawn broke and sunlight streamed through the windows, Ethan collapsed to his knees, utterly spent. The figures vanished with the first rays of light, leaving him alone in the now quiet office. But even as relief washed over him, he knew he hadn't truly escaped. Somewhere in the depths of the building, the reunion awaited. And next time, he might not be so lucky. Ethan staggered out of the office building as the first light of dawn painted the sky in hues of orange and pink. His body ached, his mind reeling from the events of the night. He had survived, but at what cost? The figures may have vanished with the sunrise, but their promises lingered in his thoughts like venomous whispers. As he reached his car, Ethan noticed something wedged beneath the windshield wiper, a manila folder marked with the words, "Confidential, do not open." His heart sank. Against every instinct screaming at him to leave it alone, he opened the folder. Inside were documents detailing the tragic history of the company. Years ago, in 1987, several employees had gone missing under mysterious circumstances. Their bodies were never found, and the case was eventually closed due to lack of evidence. But buried within the files were testimonies from surviving co-workers' tales of strange occurrences, shadowy figures, and an unshakable feeling of being watched. One document stood out a handwritten note by Sarah, one of the missing employees. In it, she described how they had all stayed late one rainy night working on a project that seemed to stretch endlessly. They joked about staying past midnight, unaware of the curse that awaited them. By morning, none of them returned home. Ethan clutched the folder tightly, his hands trembling. He realized now why the photo had felt so familiar. It was a warning. A reminder that those who stayed after midnight didn't just disappear, they became part of the cycle. Before climbing into his car, Ethan glanced back at the office building. Through the rain-streaked windows, he thought he saw movement and outline of figures gathered around his old desk, staring out at him. One of them raised a hand, beckoning him closer. With a scream, Ethan slammed the door shut and sped away, leaving the building and its secrets far behind. But deep down, he knew he couldn't escape forever. The reunion wasn't over. It had only begun. Months later, another night shift worker took Ethan's place. On their very first night, they received a cryptic email draft addressed to all staff. The subject line read, "Reunion Reminder." Beneath it, 3 simple words echoed through the empty office. "We miss you." And so, the cycle continued. Next story. The pale thing in the cornfield. I saw it between the stalks. I don't know where to begin. I suppose I should start with the cornfields, those endless rows of green, stretching out like a sea under the summer sun. They were everywhere when I came back home. Or what used to be my home. My family's farm sat nestled between them, surrounded by acres upon acres of stalks, so tall they seemed to scrape the sky. It was supposed to be temporary, a few weeks, helping out before heading back to the city, but something about those fields felt wrong from the moment I arrived. The first night, I didn't think much of it. Just some strange noises coming from outside my bedroom window, rustling sounds, faint but persistent, as though something or someone was moving through the crops. But there wasn't any wind that evening. Not even a breeze stirred the air inside the house, yet the sound continued, soft and deliberate, almost rhythmic. At first, I told myself it was just mice or squirrels, or maybe one of the stray dogs that sometimes wandered onto our property. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever it wasn't alone. And then there was the snapping sound, a sharp crack, like a branch breaking, or no, not a branch, a cornstalk. I froze, staring at the curtains covering my window. Beyond them lay the field, its dark silhouette looming against the moonlit sky. For a second, I thought I saw a movementa pale flash, quick and fleeting, slipping away into the shadows. But when I squinted harder, trying to make sense of it, all I could see were the endless rows of corn swaying ever so slightly, as if mocking me. It wasn't until later that I realized how foolish I'd been to ignore it. By day, everything seemed normal. The fields shimmered in the heat, their leaves whispering together whenever a gentle gust passed through. Dad would send me out to check on things, make sure the irrigation lines weren't clogged, count the ears ready for harvest. I'd trudge along the dirt paths cutting through the crop, feeling nothing more than sweat dripping down my neck and the weight of the sun above me. But at night, everything changed. The whispers started small. At first, it was just Mom. She mentioned offhandedly over dinner one evening, "You know, your grandfather always said there was something strange about these fields." Her voice dropped lower, almost conspiratorial. Though she tried to play it off as a joke, he claimed he once saw a figure out there late at night, said it looked human, but too thin, too pale, like it didn't belong here. Dad snorted, dismissing her words with a wave of his hand. "Your grandpa liked his whiskey," he said gruffly. "If you ask me, he probably mistook a scarecrow for a ghost." Mom laughed nervously, but I noticed the way her eyes darted toward the window behind him. Neither of them brought it up again after that. Still, I wondered, maybe it was curiosity, or maybe it was stupidity. But part of me wanted to find out for myself whether there was anything to the old stories. So one night, armed only with a flashlight and a stubborn streak, I decided to venture into the cornfield. The air was thick, heavy with humidity, pressing down on my chest like an invisible hand. As I stepped off the porch and into the field, the crunch of gravel beneath my boots echoed unnaturally loud in the silence. Then came the smelty, earthy tang of soil mixed with the sharp sweetness of crushed husks. It filled my nostrils, clinging to every breath I took. I shone the flashlight beam ahead, carving a narrow path through the towering stalks. Everything looked the same, row after row of identical plants, their leaves brushing against each other with a dry rustle. But as I walked deeper, the light began to falter. Shadows pooled around me, darker than they should have been, swallowing the glow of my flashlight whole. It was disorienting, like stepping into another world entirely. And then I heard it. A sound not loud but unmistakable, something moving nearby, not footsteps exactly, more like dragging, uneven and halting as if whatever made it wasn't walking properly. My heart leapt into my throat, and I swung the flashlight wildly, searching for the source. Nothing, just the endless rows of corn, standing silent and still. Or so I thought. There it was again, this time closer, louder, a snap. Another stalk breaking, followed by the wet crunch of something shifting through the undergrowth. My pulse raced, pounding in my ears. I told myself to turn around, to head back to the safety of the house, but my feet wouldn't obey. Instead, I pressed forward, drawn by some primal need to understand what lurked within those walls of green. That's when I saw caught a glimpse of it. Out of the corner of my eye, a flash of pale skin gliding between the stalks. Too pale, almost translucent, and moving wrong. Jerky, unnatural movements, like a puppet being manipulated by unseen strings. Its limbs stretched impossibly long, reaching further than they should have, twisting in ways that defied logic. I stumbled backward, nearly dropping the flashlight. Whatever it was, it had seen me now. I could feel its gaze boring into me, cold and unblinking, even though I couldn't see its face. Panic surged through me, overriding reason. Without thinking, I turned and ran. Running through a cornfield in the dark is not easy. The stalks clawed at my arms, snagging my clothes, forcing me to zigzag through the maze-like rows. Behind me, I could hear it following breathing, ragged and labored, each exhalation a hot gust against the base of my neck. Sometimes I thought I could feel its fingers grazing my skin, though whenever I glanced over my shoulder, there was nothing there. Eventually, I burst free of the field, tumbling onto the hard-packed dirt road leading back to the house. The creature didn't follow me beyond the edge of the crops, but I knew it was still watching. I could sense its presence lingering just out of sight, waiting patiently for me to return. When I finally reached the safety of the porch, I collapsed against the doorframe, trembling uncontrollably. Inside, Mom called out worriedly, asking why I was shaking so badly. I lied, telling her I'd tripped and scraped my knee. She didn't press me further, but I saw the concern etched across her face. Over the next few days, I tried to convince myself it was all in my head. Maybe exhaustion had gotten to me, or perhaps I really had imagined the whole thing. But the signs kept piling up. More rustling sounds at night, more snapped stalks littering the ground near the house. And worst of all, faint outlines appearing in the distance during sunrise, tall, gangly figures standing motionless among the corn, their faces obscured by the morning haze. One morning, I swore I saw one of them looking directly at me, its head tilted slightly, as if studying me before melting back into the rows. When I told Dad about it, he dismissed it with a grunt. "Probably just a deer," he muttered, refilling his coffee cup. But his knuckles went white around the handle, and for the first time I noticed the revolver tucked into the waistband of his jeans. The final confrontation happened on the last night I spent there. By then, I knew better than to go near the fields alone, but desperation drove me anyway. I needed answers, closure, anything to explain what was happening. Armed with a lantern this time, I ventured back into the depths of the crop, determined to confront whatever dwelled within. This time, it found me first. I remember the moment vividly. The lantern flickered, casting eerie shadows across the stalks surrounding me. Then, without warning, the creature emerged from the darkness. It stood mere feet away, illuminated briefly by the wavering light. Its form was gaunt, skeletal, its skin stretched taut over protruding bones. Eyes black voids, devoid of life, stared straight into mine, unblinking and unyielding. Its mouth opened wide, revealing jagged teeth stained with something dark and sticky. Before I could scream, it lunged. Time slowed as I dove to the side, narrowly avoiding its outstretched claws. The lantern fell, spilling oil onto the ground and igniting a small fire. The flames roared to life, illuminating the area brightly enough to reveal dozens of similar shapes lurking in the periphery, their forms distorted and monstrous. In that instant, I understood. These weren't animals or spirits. They were something else entirely. Something ancient, malevolent, and hungry. Somehow, I managed to escape. Whether it was luck or sheer terror driving me, I bolted through the field faster than I ever had before, ignoring the pain as thorns tore at my flesh. When I reached the house, I slammed the door shut behind me, barricading it with furniture, despite knowing it wouldn't hold forever. Now, sitting here in the quiet darkness, I listened to the sounds outside, rustling, snapping, breathing. Every night it grows louder, closer. Whatever it is, it's getting bolder, braver. Soon I fear it won't stop at the edge of the field anymore. If you're hearing this, please believe me. There's something out there, something that doesn't belong, and it's coming for us. Is anyone still listening? Cropsy breathed outside our window. It was a dark and stormy night in the small town of Willow Hollow, where the air carried an unsettling chill that seemed to seep into every corner. The clock read 11:30 p.m. as the Carter family, Mark, his wife Emily, and their two children, Jake, aged 12, and Lily, who was 8, settled into their modest home on Pine Lane. The house stood nestled among towering trees, its wooden walls creaking softly with every gust of wind that swept through the valley. For years, the Carters had enjoyed peaceful nights here, lulled to sleep by the rustling leaves and distant calls of nocturnal creatures. But this night would be different. The family gathered in the living room, the warm glow of the fireplace casting flickering shadows across the walls. Mark read aloud from an old book about local legends, pausing occasionally to explain the tales to his curious children. Among the stories were whispers of Cropsey, a mysterious figure said to haunt these very woods, lurking in the shadows and preying on unsuspecting victims. While Jake listened intently, his imagination sparked by the vivid descriptions, Lily curled up beside her mother, her eyes wide with a mix of fascination and fear. As the fire dwindled and embers glowed faintly, the family retired to bed, each retreating to their respective rooms. Outside, the forest grew eerily still, the usual sounds of wildlife replaced by an unsettling silence. It wasn't long before Lily woke with a start, her heart pounding wildly in her chest. She lay perfectly still, straining her ears to listen. At first, she thought it might have been a dream, faint rustling outside her window, the soft tapping against the glass, but then came the breath. "Shh," it whispered, low and raspy, right outside her bedroom window. Her breath caught in her throat as sheer terror gripped her body. The sound wasn't human. It carried an otherworldly quality, reverberating through the room as if spoken directly into her mind. Clutching her blanket tightly, she squeezed her eyes shut, willing the sound to stop. But it didn't. Instead, the breathing grew louder, more insistent, pressing against the glass as if trying to force its way inside. Outside, the moon peeked through the clouds, casting silvery light across the forest floor. Shadows danced eerily among the trees, their movements unnatural and deliberate. Lily dared not cry out for fear of drawing whatever presence lingered closer. Her hands trembled as she reached for her flashlight, switching it on cautiously. The beam of light illuminated nothing but empty space near her window, though she could feel its gaze boring into her from somewhere beyond. Unable to bear the suspense any longer, Lily slipped quietly out of bed, padding softly toward the door. She hesitated briefly before opening it just enough to peek into the hallway. To her relief, the rest of the house appeared calm, the rhythmic breathing of her family members audible through the thin walls. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone was watching her every move. Back in her room, the breathing resumed, growing bolder now. It wasn't merely outside anymore. It seemed to echo through the walls, filling every corner of the room. "Come out and play," it whispered, its tones soothing yet undeniably menacing. Each word sent shivers down Lily's spine, yet part of her felt inexplicably drawn to obey. Summoning whatever courage she possessed, Lily tiptoed to the front door, her fingers trembling as she turned the handle. The cool night air greeted her as she stepped onto the porch, her bare feet brushing against the wooden planks. The forest loomed ahead, its darkness impenetrable even under the pale glow of the moon. Yet, amidst the shadows, she spotted Movemanta hunched figure standing motionless at the edge of the tree line. Its form was gaunt, its shoulders slumped and covered in tattered clothing that flapped gently in the breeze. its head tilted slightly, studying her with eyes that glowed faintly in the dark. For a moment, neither moved, locked in a silent exchange that seemed to stretch on forever. Then, without warning, the creature took a step forward, its massive feet crunching against the fallen leaves. Lily gasped, stepping back instinctively. "Stay away," she shouted, her voice cracking slightly. The creature paused, tilting its head once more as if considering her words. Then, slowly, it raised one hand, pointing toward the forest. "Follow me," it whispered, its voice resonating through the night air. Paralyzed with fear, but unable to look away, Lily stood frozen as the creature turned and disappeared into the depths of the woods. Behind her, the door creaked open as Mark emerged, alerted by her cries. "Lily, what's wrong?" he asked, his voice laced with concern. But when he looked where she pointed, there was nothing, only the endless expanse of trees swaying gently in the breeze. Inside, the family huddled together, trying to make sense of what had happened. Emily held Lily tightly, her own fear masked by maternal instinct. Mark grabbed a flashlight and ventured cautiously into the woods, searching for any sign of the mysterious figure. But the forest remained silent, its secrets hidden beneath layers of shadow and mist. In the days that followed, strange occurrences plagued the cabin. Objects moved on their own accord, doors creaked open and shut without explanation, and whispers echoed through the halls late at night. Lily claimed to hear her name called repeatedly, though no one else could confirm the sounds. Despite their skepticism, the family began to believe they were being watch-stalked, even by something far greater than themselves. Desperate for answers, they consulted local historians and Native American elders, learning about the legend of Cropsey and its connection to the land. Some believed the creature acted as a guardian of the forest, protecting it from those who sought to harm it. Others spoke of encounters with beings who communicated telepathically, offering guidance or warnings depending on intent. Regardless, the parallels between these accounts and their own experiences were undeniable. Weeks turned into months, and the haunting continued. Sleep eluded the Carters as they listened helplessly to the whispers that filled their home. Eventually, they made the difficult decision to leave Willow Hollow behind, relocating to a city far removed from the forest and its mysteries. For a time, peace returned to their lives. They rebuilt routines, finding comfort in the familiarity of urban surroundings. Yet, every now and then, during quiet nights when the world seemed most still, Lily swore she heard it again, that same raspy whisper calling her name softly in the dark. Years later, the Carters rarely spoke of their ordeal. Though grateful for their escape, they couldn't shake the feeling that the forest and its enigmatic inhabitant truly let go. Somewhere, deep within the woods surrounding Willow Hollow, Cropsey still waited, watching, listening, ready to call another name into the night. Next story. Creepy factory ghosts encounter during night shift. Factory ghosts in the dark. I used to think that night shifts were boring. Lonely? Sure. Quiet? Definitely. But boring. That was the whole appeal. No managers breathing down your neck, no coworkers interrupting your flow, just you, the machines, and time moving slowly. At least, that's what I believed until I took the job at Harlan Steelworks. The factory was built back in the 1940s and had barely been updated since. The entire building groaned like an old man every time the wind hit the walls. Flickering lights, rusted metal, faded safety posters from decades past, everything reeked of age, and something else I couldn't place at first. I was hired through a temp agency. They needed someone to cover the overnight shift after one of the workers abruptly quit. No details were given, just, he left mid-shift and didn't come back. I should have seen that as a red flag. But I needed the money, and the guy on the phone said it was easy work. Just monitor the furnace temperatures. Make sure the conveyors don't jam. Log activity in the binder near the main control panel. That's it. No heavy lifting, no tools, no one to talk to. Easy. My first night started at 10:00 p.m. The factory was about 30 minutes outside town, surrounded by nothing but cornfields and mist. I remember how quiet it was when I pulled into the lot. No other cars. Just mine and the long, low building stretching into the dark like a sleeping beast. I had to buzz myself in. No guard, no receptionist, just a keypad and a red button. Inside, the air was thick with dust and oil. The only light came from a few flickering overheads. The silence was so complete, I could hear the hum of the fluorescents like they were whispering directly in my ears. I found the control panel and checked the binder. The previous shift had signed out at 9:55. No notes, no warnings, just initials, KL. That name would come back to me later, in the worst way. The first 2 hours were uneventful. I made my rounds, logged temps, stretched my legs. The machines weren't running maintenance, apparently so it was just me and the silence. Around midnight, things started to feel wrong. It began with a loud clang from the far end of the conveyor line. I froze. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't a creaky pipe. It was deliberate, like someone had kicked a metal drum. I called out, "Hello? Anyone there?" No response. I grabbed the flashlight hanging by the panel and walked toward the noise. The beam cut through the dark like a knife. I passed rows of dormant machinery, their surfaces slick with oil and grime. Everything looked undisturbed. But then, at the end of the corridor, just past the hydraulic press, I saw movement, a figure darting between machines. I nearly dropped the flashlight. "Hey!" I shouted, trying to sound firm. "You're not supposed to be here!" Still nothing. I picked up my pace, turned the corner. No one. But I swear I heard breathing, labored, ragged breathing, right behind me. I turned fast. Just empty space. I tried to shake it off. Told myself my eyes were playing tricks. Maybe a rat. Maybe my own reflection. But the dread didn't leave. It clung to me like cold sweat. I returned to the control panel and tried to refocus. Logged another temperature check. But when I glanced at the binder, something had changed. Under the last log entry, someone had written, "You shouldn't be here." I stared at the words, my mouth suddenly dry. I hadn't written that. I was alone. I tore the page out and shoved it in my pocket. Told myself maybe it had been there the whole time, and I just hadn't noticed. But I didn't believe it. Around 2:00 a.m., the intercom crackled to life. A garbled voice said, "Help, down here." My stomach turned. There wasn't supposed to be anyone else in the building. I grabbed the flashlight again, hands shaking. "Who is this?" I asked. "Where are you?" Static. Then again, "Trapped, please." I followed the sound toward the maintenance sub-levelan area I hadn't been told about. The stairs were narrow and slick with moisture. The deeper I went, the colder it got. At the bottom was a long hallway lit by red emergency bulbs. I moved slowly, every step echoing like a gunshot. The voice came again. "Don't leave me here." I turned the corner. The hallway ended at a massive steel door marked Furnace Room B. It was ajar. I pushed it open. The heat hit me like a wave, but the room was empty except for a single charred hard hat resting in the center of the floor. The name etched into it? K.L., the worker who'd left mid-shift. Or, rather, hadn't left at all. I backed out of the room, heart hammering. That's when the door slammed shut behind me. I screamed and banged on the door, but it wouldn't budge. Then the whispers began. At first, it sounded like steam hissing from the pipes. But then I heard words. We never left. Join us. Burned, but not gone. The lights dimmed. Shadows stretched across the walls, writhing like they were alive. I turned in circles, flashlight trembling. And that's when I saw them. Figures emerging from the darkness, half-formed, their bodies blackened and twisted. Faces melted, eyes hollow. They moved slowly, dragging themselves toward me with jerky, unnatural movements. I screamed, ran. I don't remember how I escaped the sublevel. Somehow, I made it back to the control panel. I grabbed my keys, my bag, and bolted out the front door into the rain. When I looked back, the lights in the factory windows were all off, except one, up on the second floor. And in that window, I saw a silhouette watching me. It raised a hand and waved. I quit the next day, didn't ask for my paycheck, didn't tell the agency what happened. A week later, I saw a news article. Temporary worker vanishes during night shift at Harlan Steelworks. A new guy, hired to cover my old spot. They never found him. And the factory? Still operational. Still hiring. But some nights, when I'm driving past those cornfields, I swear I see smoke rising from the roof. And if I roll down the window, I can still hear the whispers. We never left. Do you believe in ghosts now? Because I didn't. Until I met them. Next story. What happened in Black Hollow Woods? Everyone who enters disappears. I've always been drawn to mysteries. Ever since I was a child, I've had this insatiable curiosity about things that couldn't be explained, things that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up and left me staring out windows late into the night. But nothing could have prepared me for what happened in Black Hollow Woods. It started with my sister, Clara. She wasn't just family. She was my best friend. We shared everything, the secrets we kept from our parents, the dreams we whispered under the covers when we thought no one else was listening. And then she vanished. Just like that. Clara disappeared 3 years ago. One day, she went hiking alone near the edge of Black Hollow Woods. She never came back. There were no signs of struggle, no evidence of foul play, and no body ever found. The authorities treated it as an isolated incident at first, but the more I dug, the more I realized hers wasn't the only disappearance tied to those woods. The locals call them Black Hollow Woods, though they rarely speak of them unless you press hard enough, and even then, their answers are vague, tinged with fear. They say it's cursed. Some claim it's haunted,